Hemshech Chaim Beis. We finished Discourse 37, we're up to Discourse 38. Kimarei Shurim Bolok Terag. Tov Reshayin Gimel. In chapter 149. So, we have the picture, after explaining at length the difference between two Yechudim, Yisrael Saba Tfuna, or Yechud of Abba V'Ima Tatoin, the lower one that's connected to application, to the world, to others, to Azulas, to Adover Nifrit, something outside of itself. And then there's Yechud Abba V'Ima Tatoin, which is Meichen Be'etzem, how it's for itself, within itself, connected to, and a reflection of the source. He explained in the last Maimer, to explain that further, he explained the two types of Amshachas for Atzilus, which is essentially Medaber, that's like Meichen. And the rest of them, is how Atzilus transmits for the purpose of Biyah, which is very Dover Nifrit, something Dover Nivdal, as he put it, something separate and outside, briefly. And through that we have got also developed understanding in Seichel itself, all the levels of Medaber, etc. Which all come to explain, as I said, Kel Shaddai, the Amshacha of the Ovis, which is the lower Amshacha, and in that itself several levels. If we remember, Shaddai has itself names, and there's still not fully all the things tied up together because it's not so clear exactly where the Ovis, how high do they go. We clearly know it's Meichen and Yisrael Saba Tfuna. We also know Shaddai, even Shaddai, that it breaks, remember Malashon Shidud, it breaks the boundaries, it breaks the Mishadet HaMarachas, it suspends and breaks the natural order, but only as miracles hidden in nature. So it's still within existence, but as I said, it's stretching existence to the furthest boundaries possible. So clearly it reaches all the way up in Atzilus, but it's still not Matan Torah. But the next Maimer continues this theme, and as I said, this Maimer, Bolok, and the one that we've learned, Chukas, are two Maimorim that the Alter Rebbe Rashab added in the second bounce. So now we start Maimer 38. Kimarei Shurim. And here the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that the Teichen HaScholos HaMaimer, the content of the beginning of the Maimer, is Beis B'chinas, Beis Efanim Ila V'ol. Beis Efani Ila V'ol. Two types of cause and effect. You wanted to say something?
Like, finish off the last line. It says that through Teilah Mitzvahs you're Mamshech.
Yeah, Atzmus HaChachmas, which is clearly Matan Torah, and in other words, like the level of Paraduma. Mamshech, even Paraduma, which is beyond Seichel, but even Paraduma, if you recall, was also not completely beyond. It's also Seichel. It's also Chachmas Tima. That's why he wanted to have it, because ultimately the revealed intelligence is a reflection of that.
Well, the Teilah Mitzvahs includes Paraduma.
It looks like that's Paraduma, Asmus Mamish. I mean, probably that and more. Paraduma is probably not all of that. But Chukas HaTeirah, remember, Paraduma is part of Matan Torah.
Are you relating Yisrael Saba Tfuna to the Amshach Biyah and Avoy and whatever?
It looks like it. It didn't say it specifically, but it seems very close to that. That the Ovis is Atzilus L'Tzerech Biyah.
And that's
not Atzilus L'Tzerech. Yeah, so it appears like, but I don't want to conclude that because he hasn't spelled it out, and I'm sure he will.
But he said though the Rebbe Rashab speaks about the Yisrael Saba Tfuna and now about this.
He spoke about the two Yechudim. There's the Yechud Primi, Yechud Chitzeni. That's clearly Matan Torah and the Ovis. The Ovis is Yechud Chitzeni, the outer unification, which seems here is the Tzedek. That seems like that's the level. He's not finished yet. Let's continue. Kimarei Shurim Arenu literally means from the top of the mountains, I will see you.
Cliffs.
Top of the cliffs. Arenu. Literally means it's talking about the future. Arenu. Kimarei Shurim Arenu. Top of the cliffs. We will see. Arenu. We will watch. Kivi Isa b'Medrash Rabbah boy Parshat Tezvav. Medrash Rabbah boy Parshat Tezvav says Mereish Shurim, the top, like the peaks. Tsurim, you said Tsurim, cliffs, hills, mountains. Tsur is a big rock. Yeah. But it means like the high peaks, the high vistas. Elu ha'ovis. Tsurim, these are the ovis. We find in the beginning the Eibishter wanted to establish the world. He didn't find, in other words, like pillars, like foundations to establish it until the ovis rose. Moshe Melech, all this is the Medrash. Example for a king, Mavakish Livnis Medina, wanted to build a country, a nation, Medina, a country. Bol Litan HaYesod, they came to establish the foundation. And the water was rising from the Untergrund, from the source, from the Tahem is the Upgrund. But it's like the source of the water under the ground, source of the springs, and did not allow the foundation to hold. They didn't allow for the foundation to hold. A foundation needs a solid ground. It can't have water pouring into there. And they found there a big rock. And he said, on this rock, I will establish the Medina.
Same, it has to be a solid rock.
Yeah, like for example, the Chabad house of my brother-in-law, Punkt his mazel, solid rock, but there were a lot of streams underneath. And if you're not lucky, so he was building a mikveh, which goes even further than the foundation, because you have to go deeper down. It's all the way in the basement, and they hit a waterbed. There was no water there anymore, but it was soft and not solid rock. No, they had to go do a whole thing, concrete. It's a ganze parsha. It costs a lot of money.
Special concrete.
Yes, it's the concrete to fill in that to make sure, because you can't have even one crack there. It has to be so solid for the whole building straight up. So Shamsur Godlam Nazar Nikuveres Hamedina. Kach, that's the mashal. Kach Metchila, the same thing in the beginning. Now we're talking about God creating the world. V'hoya Lekim. Mvakish Lekein Se'elam. God wanted to establish the world. V'hoya Yerushalayim Manichim. So the Rishonim are like the Tahim. The wicked did not allow, meaning, what do you mean they didn't allow? They did, not that they could challenge God, but God didn't have what whom to work with. They were too weak. They're not a solid foundation. Kivin Shaboa Ovis, which is the Tzur. Since the Ovis came. On these I will establish the world. Shenemer kiloi l'Hashem mitzukei oretz v'yoshes aleim tevel. Like it says, Hashem mitzukei oretz. Hashem is mitzukei oretz. Mitzukei is the
same thing as
yeah. Mitzukei, I think, is mitzukei oretz is like
the rock, the clefts of the rocks.
The rocks that come out of the earth.
Tzuk is a cliff, you know?
Yeah.
The cliffs from the earth, okay. V'yoshas aleim tevel, and God established on them. It's another word, Yoshas, Canaan. Tevel, the
He's set on them.
yeah, he's established. Yeah, he established on them Tevel, the Tevel would be the existence, huh?
The world, the globe.
Yeah, the world. Well, the Cheda Medrash Tamur, seemingly the Medrash is surprising. Tamur is strange, it's surprising. The Ma'u Inyan Shahayashem Mevakish L'Kenan. What is this Inyan that God wanted to establish and He couldn't find? What does that mean? What does it mean? What's the deeper meaning of that? Well, Ma'u Inyan L'Kenan. And what is the meaning of the Canaan to establish? You're not talking about the actual creation of the world. Creation of the world, He doesn't need anybody. He created the world because He has the power to create. The Canaan clearly means something in the world itself. He wanted to establish a strong foundation. So what's going on here exactly? Which really, you can see already at the beginning of the answer. He's not talking about the creation. Something in the world itself He wanted to establish. Interesting there it says Metzurim, Reish Tzurim, like, but the Tzurim come from the earth, okay. So the Reish Tzurim, it comes from the earth, and the peaks, and then they become, you put it down below, to also be foundations. Okay. וגם אמרי מייצים אנו משמע וגם אמרי מייצים אנו, the beginning of the measure it says meitzim anu, we find that mitchilo hi hamokim avakish. Mashma, from this is mashma, from that word, it's also like not a common word. What do you mean meitzim anu? The measure is saying we find. So it says mashma is a davar poshet shoyi hamokim avakish l'kein vehechem matzinu zes. In other words, when he says meitzim anu, it seems like, in other words, it's like we know meitzim anu we find. So he's saying the davar poshet. He says where vehechem matzinu zes. Where do we find this that it's so like obvious?
To be bucky in the whole Terikula to ask such a question. Yeah. If not,
like usually a medrash says Lamadnu, Tam Rabbanon, whatever. Sometimes they don't Tashma. Isa, when you look at the Meitzim. Okay. Who gefit men das? The Albriya Se'elam Omar b'Medrash al Pasuk Shukav Amudi Sheish. On the creation of the world, the Medrash says on the Pasuk Shukav Amudi Sheish, its pillars. Sheikh of Amudi Sheish. Its pillars are pillars of marble. Sheikh of is also like thighs.
that's not what it's here.
No, but there it's a shirim. I mean, it's like a mashal for that. Yeah.
Right.
So it says Sheikh of Zeh Elam Shenishteke Kadosh Baruch Hu L'Vreisa. What's the word Sheikh of? What's the word Sheikh of from the word? It comes from the word Shukah, desire. That is talking about that's the world which God desires to create. So Sheikah means not just it's the object of God's desire, basically. It's not shukah, it's the object of something that you have a nishtek to. So notice the medrash we have, we found the medrash that says there's a desire. But where did we find that he wanted to establish and he couldn't until the others came? What's the pshittis called? It's such a given that he wanted to establish. Yeah. And also, what's the scene that the Rashaim don't allow? After he wants to do so, what do you mean they don't allow? What kind of opposition is this? It also says till the others came and they merited. Why taka the others? What's taka the reason? What are the others offer? That on them God could rely, can establish this thing. What's the dikduk, the precise language? Zachu, they merited. Till they came and they did what they had to do. Zachu's like also, they merited to it. Oh, that's a series of questions here. Also we have to understand the word mokim. The shema mokim ain't a rogel kol kach b'divrei Hazal. Pnei ma'im shema mokim. What's the diuk of the word mokim? That a mokim, God is mokim. It's not so common in Hazal. So why does he say here the word mokim? Okay. To understand all this, we have to preface what we learned earlier. Now we're talking in the structure itself, in the shtalshlus, in the evolution, the evolution and progression of the energies as they go from level to level in the Esses Firas. There's a difference between how their shtalshlus, how this transmission, this progression goes, is for the need of this particular world called Atzilus. And then there's how this is a transmission that's necessary to be able to transmit outside of Atzilus into Biyah. Which means in the shtalshlus of the 10 spheres itself, there's two paths, parallel paths. There's two separate types of transmissions. It's almost like saying that there's a wire that extends from the source that goes into Atzilus to power Atzilus, energize Atzilus, and there's another wire that goes to power the lower world. Now, obviously, we're talking about the same message spheres. We're not talking about 20 spheres, but we're talking about two types of so-called messages, codes. One is for that purpose of Atzilus, to keep Atzilus going, and one is to make Biyah, activate Biyah.
I have a hard time with that. When you say it's the same necessities, doesn't each world have their own necessities?
But where do they come from? There is no world. Everything comes from a previous world. Nothing exists.
But Bria doesn't Bria have its 10 spheres?
Without that, Atzilus has nothing. Bria it doesn't exist. It's a progression. Where does Atzilus get its spheres from? From the spheres of the Kav. And the Kav gets it from the spheres before the Tzimtzum. We're talking about one series of spheres. There's only 10 spheres. Esa spheres bli ma, but Esa spheres bli teisha le'esa.
That's in Atzilus.
Everywhere, there's 10 spheres. There's
10 spheres in Bria, no?
What? Did you hear what I just said?
No, you said that everything's a progression. Everything comes from Atzilus.
Right.
So wouldn't be in Atzilus, they wouldn't exist in the Bria.
A teacher has an idea, and he's now sending it to 4 different levels of students. Is there 4 different spheres? It's the same idea, just diluted. It's just same idea as it goes through progression, because it manifests on a lower level. Bria is manifests on the level of Bria. And Tanya says, "Nishtal shloman, the keiches hanefesh, the faculties in you
That's
and in me."
You said as it goes through a progression. In other words, is it this one idea and they're each one accepting it differently, or is it one idea that you're?
They're not talking about human beings here. We're talking about levels.
Talking about the mashal they just gave.
Yeah, the sun is shining.
Yeah.
The sun is shining with one filter. It's like this. Another filter, it's a little not as powerful. Another filter. Like he said, through a chalein, there's a whole bunch of filters. Think of it simply as that. This is not mathematics. This is this is how things come into being. You have to think very abstractly because you're not talking about Gashmizdika things. In Tanya in Perek Gimel he says, "Eser keiches hanefesh nishtalshlu mahen," from the Eser spheres. What does this mean? That you and I have Chochmah Bina Das Chesed Gvura Tiferes Netzach Yisei Malchus. We have a human body in the image of God. What does this mean? It means there's a level where the image of God is dominant. Then you add more layers, and it turns into a human body with keiches hanefesh that are nishtalshlu from the 10 hidden spheres. And then in one of the Hagos there he says, inside the 10 spheres of in Perek Vav, inside the 10 spheres you see is the slab is the 10 spheres of Yitzira, which within them is the 10 spheres of Bria, within them is the 10 spheres of Atzilus.
I'm just.
Okay. But here he's talking about something else. He's talking that there's two types of forms of energy. One that's for Atzilus itself, and one is in the Shtalshus Esas Spheres, completely different for the need of Biyah. For Atzilus, as we learned, the Hamshachah spheres is a level of air that's me'ena etzem. Because Atzilus is completely aligned with the source, with God, with the divine source. So there is a Shtalshus, but it's air me'ena etzem. Like in other words, if you compare Atzilus to Biyah, it would be like similar to what we spoke earlier, the comparison, let's say, of Chochmah compared to Malchus. Remember, Chochmah, Abba Mekanana be Atzilus. Abba is nested in Atzilus. Atzilus is like Chochmah compared to Bina and the lower levels. Remember, Yudke, Vovke, Datzcham, or in each of the worlds. So Atzilus, its main force is Eir. It has Kalim, but its main thing is Eir. The real Kalim emerge out in the lower levels, is where they become more dominant. What's Eir? Eir is Me'ena Etzem. It's not the Etzem, but it's Me'ena Etzem. We said Shlomo HaMelech. He was wise, he was able to get everywhere. Machasarta, he's not missing anything, but he can't get beyond, but he still wants it and still has a glimpse of it. That's Atzilus. V'hamshach b'eses spheres shel tzera b'yah u'b'chinas ha'ora nivdalas. And the hamshach and the 10 spheres for the need of b'yah, that is already a detached, removed, a separate type of reflection. In other words, a veil that doesn't let the ha'ora be complete reflection of its source. If you remember, we spoke about all the things with spheres, all the levels of spheres. So we said spheres, number, story, behirus. And the behirus, the sapir, spoke about it. Remember, many levels of transparency. There was transparency of the kelim. There's transparency of compared to levushim. For example, your arms and legs are more reflective of your faculties of your soul than, let's say, your clothing. Your clothing is not an extension of you. Okay, but compared to the keiches hanefesh, your body is also a type of levush, except it's a connected levush. So it's all relative. Then you come into the faculties, and they're also not the etzem hanefesh. Then even the keiches in the nefesh is also not the etzem. So you talk about a bunch of levels as they go further and further, and they become less and less transparent channels for the energy that's inside of them. In Atzilus, the transparency is complete. We're not talking now how it is on the level of Bligvul and Seviv and Makif. We're talking about in Eir HaGvul itself. So Atzilus reflects of what the Kelim are aligned with what the Eir wants to be done. To give an example, think of it like a healthy human being, a healthy child that's born. Their body is like a seamless, transparent container that channels all their life force in a very smooth and effortless way. You have lungs, a newborn's lungs, a healthy newborn's lungs are pure. No toxins, no blockages. They breathe 100% in and out. You see the chest. The blood is flowing because they have not yet eaten, they haven't yet breathed this earth. They have not absorbed anything that should be an impediment. Thank God. Then years go past. What happens? The body starts to break down. The body starts to harden, starts getting toxified. As a result, we don't breathe 100% in. Our lungs have toxins in them. Our lungs have stuff that is breathed in. Same thing with our blood, our arteries. The channels are weaken. As they weaken, the air doesn't. It's like having a block in the passage, so the flow doesn't go complete. But it's still going well, and then it can get more and more fagrept, so to speak, more and more misaligned. So think of Atzilus as the healthiest structure where Eris and Kalim are completely aligned. Eina Etzem. And in Biyah, it's a whole different now. It's a Hadar Nivdelis. You're dealing now with a world that's a step away. It's still aligned, because we said B'riyas of Sharis HaMetzias, and Yitzhira, and so on. It's still aligned, but it's already a separate identity is being developed. This can be understood with everything, like, the moment a person loses their innocence, Adam Achava, before the Chet, after the Chet. Many ways to describe these stages in life. Yeah, we'll talk about it more, how we apply this, but this is the explanation. Finished by it, and it was explained. In every sphere there's 4 worlds. These are the 4 levels of Deim Tzameach Chaim Medaber. Shegam b'Medaber yesh Dal Madregas El. Also Medaber in Seichel, as we spoke on 4 levels like this. And Shegam b'Seichel yesh Dal Madregas El, like he says. Also in intelligence there's these 4 levels. The Deim Tzameach in B'chinas Nivdal. Deim Tzameach are one category. They're more separate. Remember Seichel Shabbateva was like technique. The actual seichel you use in crafting something, the skill. The seichel shabbateva was the intelligence in nature, like science. That's Deim Tzameach. V'chai b'chinas hamechin, rakshazah b'chinas seichel shabbadibur. Chai is mechin. He's spelling this out very specific. Even it's a good summary because it gives us a grounding. It's mechin, but it's b'chinas seichel shabbadibur. Remember the seichel to compose words. That's chai. So it's already meich. Higher than that is the meich and sheikh midis. Here is the level that I was looking for.
Which is also chai.
Yep. Remember I said in chai it seems like there's 2 levels? Yep. because it said, remember there was Chai as in Shlomo HaMelech, it was also Chai. But he said Shlomo was still Chachmat Hato, was still a Chachma of Chesed. Yeah. Betzalel was the Seichel, Betzalel was Chai. Also. Remember, Betzalel and Shlomo are basically like two levels of Chai. Because Betzalel knew how to mitzara faces, which we say that comes from Chai, not from Tzemeach. And Shlomo is higher in that Gufa. So here we have it. And then there's Meichem Be'etz. Well, so Meichem HaShayachim the Midas. So Meichem HaShayachim, so that's what he's defining. Intelligence relevant to words, intelligence relevant to, no, it was Meichem Shebe Malchus like, and Meichem Shebe Midas. Not Meichem Shebe, I'm sorry, Shayachim the Midas. And Seichel Shebe Dibur, and Shayachim the Midas. So Shayachim the Midas is Yisrael Saba Tfuna.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yisrael Saba Tfuna Shayachim the Midas. And now we discover there's another level. That's the level of connecting to. So it's correct what I said. If you remember, I said that the Asius have like two levels in them, and the Sidus have two levels in them. The Sidus as they are Daimim, and they are Tzemeach. And so too, the Asis letters, there's the Seichel Shebe Asis like Chai, Chemer Asis like he said, and then there's the Seichel Shebe Midas, Seichel Shebe Midas of it. The idea within the Asis. No, that's not correct because the Asis was Medaber. No, I'm sorry. There's two levels there, and then there's Seichel that is above. No, 1 second. The Seichel and the Asius, he said, was Medaber. One second. Right. Okay. It's fine. No, the Asius connect ultimately to Medaber. He said that for sure.
Not the Asis.
He said that's Atzilus. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, the Maila Yeser he begins Samechen Shechel Midas, and Medaber begins Atzmus Samechen. And Medaber is Atzmus Samechen, which now appears to be even higher than Shlomo HaMelech. Yeah, because Shlomo was not Atzmus Samechen. Remember, he's not Meiches Tema Chachma Shebe Keser. He's a Chachma that's Ha'ara, not Atzmus Samechen.
That's why he attempted.
You have to say Medaber, there's two levels also. That's what it comes down to, not just in Chai. In Chai there's two levels, it looks like. But also Medaber, because he says the beginning of Baal Piyah now, in the last Maimer, last paragraph, he says, Deya Kanisa Machasarti, he says, B'chinas Seichel V'das, B'chinas Medaber, Zeo Mailas Medaber, B'chinas Seichel V'das. And he said that's clearly Shlomo HaMelech. So clearly Shlomo is what Shlomo, the higher level of Chai, Moich, and Shach Midas, or is he da machasarta? So
why are you saying that has to do with Shlomo?
Because that's what he says afterwards. Who does it say? Yeah,
but as he explained at the end, that
that's Shlomo machasarta, because he's not Silas, so he is not lacking anything. He said the befeir, that's for sure. Yeah, and then there's a higher level of Chachma that he did not reach. Okay, it's almost like 6 levels now. That's what it appears to me. Maybe even more. No, it's not surprising there should be. You start breaking it down, there's subtle differences. But he did add here that in Chai itself you have Meichen, that's Seichel Shebe Dibur. He said that was clearly Betzalel. It was clearly that. Siddur is Bria. And then there's Medaber, and Shlomo is Atzilus. Atzilus is Medaber really. But in Medaber itself is a lower level, which is more Seichel, not Atzmus HaMeichen. It seems like two levels in Meichen here. That's what it looks like to me. In other words, a level between Sol Sab and Tfuna and right. It looks like there's a middle level there. Let's drop one middle level. It's fine. Doesn't contradict it.
Atzmus is sort of even it's above Meichen. It's above intelligence. It's not even together of intelligence already. It's like
I wouldn't say that at all, but he made it very clear it's intelligence. It's just not our. It's not our intelligence. So it depends what you define as intelligence. The example for this, Shigam Batzilus, and the example from this is that also Natzilus is Obchinas Medaber B'chlal, the also Natzilus, which is generally the level of Medaber. Yes, B'chol Sfira Dal Madreges Elu. So this teaches us that in every sphere there's these four levels. We learn this from the four levels of Daimon Sameach Chaim Medaber. The Ikar B'chinas Atzilus, and the primary level of Atzilus is B'chinas Atzmus HaMeichen. That's Atzilus. Atzilus is primarily Atzmus HaMeichen, the Etzem of Meichen. Hamshachah Tzedel B'yah, and the transmission said like for the need for the purpose of B'yah, who B'chinas Daimon Sameach Sheb Medaber is Daimon Sameach Medaber, v'gam B'chinas Chai Sheb Medaber she'ein ze Atzmus HaMeichen. See here he also alludes to it. Daimon Sameach Medaber for sure, and also Chai, which is also not Atzmus HaMeichen, not also the core intelligence. Okay, the summary here gives us a sharper, more succinct look at the last mimer. So it's pretty clear all the levels. As I said, there's subtleties to really break it down. It has to be mapped out perfectly how every level fits anywhere, everywhere. We'll have in B'Teisers Bia chapter 149 to understand with additional explanation. How does the exact dynamics work? The engineering work? How does it work? You're talking about a transmission that seems to be a flow in Atzilus, and then from Atzilus it progressively gets diminished. It goes through the curtain between Atzilus and Biyah and comes to the next level. We're saying, however, something more here. That there's Hamshach of the Esser Spheres itself, there's in Atzilus, there's like two messages, two codes. One which will activate and energize Atzilus, and another that will work, that is for the purpose of Biyah. So to understand more, how does that work exactly? That in Atzilus itself, you have an energy that is not for itself, but for the lower level. It would be like asking the question, you have a teacher who's teaching his peers, people in his own level. Same time, in his mind, he also has the ability, and he's preparing the ground to teach to a far lower level. How does that work inside the mind of the same teacher, these two elements? So he's going now for further explanation and understanding how this second dynamic works. It's almost like a question in a way. It doesn't pose it as a question like, what it means in Atzilus, let's say, Biyah. Why don't you just say Atzilus, and then when Atzilus comes to Malchus, it's ready to go to the next level. It starts going to the next level. Here it's clearly, he keeps saying that in Atzilus itself, there's two so-called Hamshachas. The reason he's pushing that so much, I'm assuming, I just want to go back. Yeah. It's almost like the Kav has in it a code that says this is going to be designated for Atzilus, and this is being designated for the next levels. All the way in the source, that code is there. I'm assuming the reason he's really pushing it, why does he have to go such precise explanation, is because we have, this is a guess, is because there's a question. Where do our Avos belong? Do they belong in Atzilus or do they belong in Biyah? Some places in Chassidus says clearly they're Neshamas of Atzilus, they're Makov of Atzilus. On the other hand, it says that Matan Torah was Mamshech Atzilus into Biyah, and the Avos were basically only Biyah.
There are pass-throughs.
Because they could only bring Sheresh and Avram, like we said, Shaddai. They only are able to transmit something in the structure. But to really bring Atzilus in its full intensity into Biyah, you need to have Matan Torah. On the other hand, as I just said, the Ovis are the level of Atzilus too, they're Merkava. So it seems to me that he's pushing it to show the Ovis themselves are Atzilus. But their ultimate role is, the purpose is to help be Megala Lakus in Welt, in Metzias of the world. And Matan Torah will be Megala Atzilus into the world. They were Atzilus, but in the world they didn't bring Atzilus. They brought a lower level of revelation, Shaddai, and Matan Torah will bring Atzilus into Biyah. That's what it seems to me. It doesn't say exactly specifically, but it's almost implied. And that's why it's so important for him to go into this place, because it's not that it would be simpler if you say the others aren't Biyah, and that's it. What's the problem? Then comes Matan Torah, and Matan Torah brings another revelation from Atzilus. No, but the Ovis are Atzilus, and he keeps saying Ovis is Chesed, that's Avram is Chesed Atzilus, and Yitzchak is Gvura Atzilus, and Yaakov is Teferes of Atzilus, and they did all the work on Atzilus. We spoke with the sheep, saying Lavan, etc. So clearly they're working on Atzilus. So how is it consistent with what it says that Atzilus is being introduced through Matan Torah? So on one hand, you could say that the Ovis are preparation for Matan Torah. So they began the process. In other words, they're not full-blown illumination from Atzilus, but a taste of it. Like we said, the Yichud began. But what does it mean more specifically, technically? What means began? It began through them being Megal. If you remember, he kept saying how Avram spoke to people. He was Malbish. He explained Elokus to people on their level in this world. They began by bringing it into the level that is commensurate to Biyah, which in these words are L'Tzedech Biyah, not L'Tzedech Atzilus.
And how do you fit the gal in that?
I mean, I started comparing these sections to that place. It says that, well, it sounds like the Gal. It's like there it goes that Yaakov elevates the Nekuda. Remember, he says the Nekuda of Malchus that is created in Biyah. So he elevates that into Atzilus. Then from the Malchus, he connects it to Teferes and all the way to the source. There's always an overlap. The others did things like they had Bris Milah, which was like a mitzvah gashmis. So you can't say it's completely mutually exclusive. I would think it's more or less the others did the work in the Biyah. Because there's also the Pirush Tzein Yosef from Kesed into Atzilus, the higher Pirush, Levin Elyon. The Yaakov was mamshach everything from Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim. Yeah. But so there's always an overlap, but primarily the work is bringing it into the parameters of existence, which is critical, by the way. It would be like someone saying, pour me wine that spills over, and you didn't even fill up the cup. The others had to fill up existence with as much elokus as possible before we can come and say, let's get Bligvul. It's like if there's no Yoda, there's no Adala Yoda. Understand? So in other words, like you said, you have to expand it. It would be like having a student. The student will say to the teacher, you know what, I'm ready for a big gili. But your containers are not yet developed enough to receive a lower gili. So yes, from time to time, Simchas Teda, Purim, whatever, you get. But on a regular basis, you have to first fill up as much as you can through your work, and then comes the higher level. So I think there, if you remember, he actually spoke about it. There's whole parentheses there, where he keeps saying that Yaakov really was mamshach everything. But he was primarily mamshach in Shishtalshlus. That's why he proceeded with love, and he proceeded. He actually talks about Erak Vul. Remember, in the context of the whole picture, and I'll sum it up better as we go further and I compare it again. Remember, where Sfiras are Mispar, then the Mispar leads to Bli Mispar. Then it leads to Sipur. Then it leads to Sapir. Every stage of development leads you to the next stage. So you have to say Yaakov and the Ovis, they definitely began the process, but primarily in Biyah, in the structure of existence. And then as they expanded it, they began bringing in also a glimmer of also Bligvul. Remember, we spoke about how Gvul looks at Bligvul, how the Sfiras of Gvul, the Shir Atzmei B'Kreach tells us, Meven Davar Meteir Davar, that there's something beyond. So the others were it's not just an airtight thing. They did their thing and that was it. They didn't prepare the stages. Remember, it's their children that will be receiving the Torah. And they heard from it, so it's a progressive state. Avram brought down the Shekhinah from the 7th heaven to the 6th. And Yitzchak, this isn't detached from Moshe bringing it down to earth. The Rebbe says there's no Shvi if there's no addition. If the first step didn't happen, the last step couldn't happen. So there is an overlap as they continue to get closer. So let's say the Dar before Moshe Rabbeinu, you still don't have Matan Torah, but you're now almost there. And my point is that you're going to find a lot of overlap. But overall, what they accomplished, the Ovis, is primarily the work of everything we learned of how Gvul meets Bli Gvul. Or better put, how they prepared a world of Gvul, a finite world with parameters, to be able to be aligned and then ultimately be able to receive even greater. Because remember, he said even the Ovis, what they did also came from higher than Ishtalshlus. But it's from Sheresh Ishtalshlus. It's higher from the structure, because in order to fill up the structure and repair it, that it shouldn't lack anything, in other words, how it was before Chet Tzadas, you also need to bring from a higher level. So this is so for additional explanation how that in the Hamshach and Esrei Zatzil's Skufa there's already a message for the need of Biyah that it's a Ha'ar and Nevdelis. So how does that exist in Atzilus, such a state? In other words, you're saying you're splitting up Atzilus into two. One, what it needs for itself. One is another which is an attached connection of air that is reflecting its source. And there's another element of Atzilus that is for the purpose of Biyah, which, by the way, adds another element in the interface that I just realized that's very powerful. Remember, all the way in the beginning of the Hemshel, the big question was, is Atzilus Gilead Helam or Yesh Ma'ayin? And he keeps going back and forth. First he establishes that it's Yesh Ma'ayin, the Kalim. But the Oyer is Gilead Helam. Then he said even the Oyer is also Yesh Ma'ayin because the Oyer has Sir, has Sfiris. So Chachma Ma'ayin Timotza. And compared to the Oyer HaBli Gvul, it's Gilead Helam. Yesh Ma'ayin. Now there's the other side of things. In Atzilus now itself, let's say the Atzilus, you could say it's Gilead Helam. Let's say the Biyah, you could say it's more of a Yesh Ma'ayin. Because Atzilus is already beginning to lay the ground for bringing it into the next level. Very good. Okay. That's Shtims too. So to understand this, the Inyan of this is the Hini Yudua, now it's known, she has Beze Fanim Be'ilava'ol. There's two types of Ilava'ol. Ilava'ol basically means cause and effect. We've learned this before, spoke about Meichen, Chachma, Chachma, Bina, Ilava'ol. Cause, all is effect. Ha'echad, so there's two types. This I refer you, there was a chapter we also spoke about two types of Ilol, remember? Chachma Bina, where was that? On the right side, that was in the Mems. I'll tell you right away where it was, 1 second. I think it's exactly what he said here.
He has a note further down the page on the text.
I think a little earlier than the Mems. Maybe Lamed Beis, Gimel. Where is about the Hisamtus? Here we are, okay. Yeah, Perig Lamed Tes. I don't know if it's the same two types. But if it is, see, look in chapter Lamed Tes, page 66. So he has a line that says, Ein Shaykh in Ilval, then he says, Ilval hu bebeiz Fanim. Okay. Interesting to see if it's the same two. Okay, we'll find out. It'd be nicer if it is. If it isn't, it's also fine. See?
Yeah.
Okay, let's follow along and see if it's the same.
Yeah.
Or it's a harder that's mistayef, like an onof. Either it's like a branch from a tree, or It's a Mahus Achel. Like a branch of a tree is of the same personality as the tree. But it's an effect of the tree. Cause and effect. Then there's a Mahus Nivdal completely. So let's see. Keep that in mind. Lamitas. Fine. It says two types. Echad sha'olahu Mahus Nivdal. Yeah, clear. There we go. Echad sha'olahu Mahus Nivdal me'ila. That the effect is a separate Mahus, a separate personality. Like here he's saying, Ha'ara Nivdalas. Both Ilah v'Olo. That's the point. You see, not the Yeshmayin. In Ilah v'Olo itself, you have also, the interface is so beautiful here. He's finding in every possible way where you can have a link to things. So let me add one more thing before we continue in understanding where he's going here. You see, by establishing that in Atzilus itself you have Biyah. Remember the key point was that not Atzilus is Atzilus, and then it transmits in Biyah. In Atzilus you have to say you have all the levels lower. You have Dem Tzemei Chaim Medaber, all in the Medaber, all in Atzilus. And the Atzilus of Atzilus is for Atzilus. And the other ones are the root that's going to be necessary. That helps tremendously, if you remember I said this, in understanding the interface well. Because you're not talking about a disconnect. In Atzilus you're already preparing and have a connection to what's coming afterwards, and what comes afterwards has a connection to Atzilus. And it's only Ilah v'Olo. That's what he's going here. So even though it's for Biyah, but it's still rooted in Atzilus. And even though it's not Atzilus, it's still Ha'ara Nivdalas. And this just adds, so it's not a disconnect. It's not like saying, you know what, once Atzilus finishes his job, now starts Biyah, and you're on your own. No, in Atzilus you already have the whole Biyah being set up. The code is there already. It's an Atzilus code for the need of Biyah. I would even venture to say, Lula Mistapina, that maybe it's very similar to Shir Atzmei B'Kayach, that the Eir HaBli imagines and allocates and envisions what's going to come the Gvul. In a subtle way, you could say Atzilus is envisioning what Biyah is going to be receiving, besides what Atzilus needs. And that's what he's concerned with. And that helps the interface far deeper, because there is a link. There isn't a jump. So he's not making another connection in the engineering room, my friends.
Is that a total chiddush? I mean, didn't we learn
not total. No, I don't say total. No. It's not, nothing's total. I mean, but he's definitely elaborating at length in this. Yeah.
The fact that Yud came up for Yud is a...
He said it, but he didn't elaborate to this extent. He didn't make here, if you remember at the beginning of this chapter, we discussed it at length. Beginning of chapter 147, top. Whole thing how Atzilus has all the... 149. 148. 148. On top. How it's all in Atzilus. That's why in Malchus you have all the 4 levels, in Atzilus you have all the 4 levels. Made a very big thing about making sure that in Atzilus you have all the levels. Okay, very good. So there's 2 types of Ilah v'Olo. One is Mahus Nivdal, that the cause, that it's still cause and effect. It's not a Yeshmayin. It's not like 2 separate worlds. Ayin is like a complete different world, and it creates something from nothing. Something from something can be Mahus Nivdal. It's only that this effect is kol by Ilah, is encompassed, included in the cause. And its revelation is through the Ilah. In other words, it's a separate entity. But how does it emerge? It emerges because from that cause. I gave that an example. A tree and branches is not a good example for this, because a branch is actually the same mahus. I did give an example. What would be an example for this? You could say a child, the conception of a life. It's rooted in the seed and the egg of the parents. And even though in the beginning it's in its mother's womb, it will become uber yerachimei, then it will become a separate life. So you could say cause and effect, because had you not had the parents' seed and egg fertilized, you wouldn't have a child. I'm talking about the third partner. You need also a soul, but I'm not saying that's the exact example, but I'm just trying to visualize a bit. Whereas a tree from a branch is not at all that way. A tree is an extension of a branch is an extension of the tree, and that's that.
Or letters. Yud, from a Yud comes out the full letters.
That would be which one? Mahus, same Mahus.
You just draw a hay from the yud, it becomes a hay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's see here. Let's see if he does give examples, hopefully. So even though it's nimtza kolol, so two things. It's encompassed in the cause, and it's revealed through the ilah. It could only have one. It could only be encompassed in there, but something else reveals it. Something else schleps it out, extracts it. He says both things. The cause both encompasses it, and it reveals it. Yet, what does it reveal? Something that's different than the cause, a different personality. But it's still cause and effect. It's not a what's the word I want to use? A removed reality. It's not like something that's completely doesn't have a cause, so to speak. Doesn't sense it has a cause. Yeah, you have this. You have this in many situations in chemistry. You have different alloys and different combinations that are rooted in a thing, but then what they produce is a completely different product, a completely different material, a completely different element. You have this constantly. You have these. They make these synthetic stuff. It's made from things, but what it produces is nothing similar at all to its original ingredients. Yet those are the ingredients that bring it to being. Whereas there are things that you make that are very similar to their original personality. I'm trying to think of something like that. Bronze? Oh, what's bronze? Bronze is a combination of copper and what?
Tin.
And tin.
Copper and iron?
Copper and iron, I think. Aluminum is tin and what? Aluminum. Their original elements and their... Okay, fine. I wish I had a chemist who can give you two real good examples, but there's plenty of examples for this.
Tin is an element. Copper is an element. Bronze.
Another example of a Mahus Nadella could be also water molecules. When you heat water and it turns into gas, the cause is clearly the water. There wouldn't be no gas, but gas has a different personality than water.
Okay.
Even though you could condense it back and could turn from vapor back into liquid. But I think that would be that it changes its.
You would say that's niblo.
I'm thinking. I mean, it's good to have examples because you remember. Keep in mind the visual I have for this, which I hope this helps. I see this like a one big assembly line here, and God is here. We're here, and there's a whole bunch of disconnections. The whole machine is falling apart, or almost, and we're trying to reconnect. It's like rebuilding, and every link, you need to have every link there. There can't be a missing link. So every step of the way. So Ilav all that's Nivdal is a little separate, so it gives more room for individuality. Ilav all that's more connected creates more fusion.
Iluvalo is like so 17th.
It's like I'm thinking, I wish I had some...
17th century. It's not even the way scientists think anymore. So.
First of all, who are scientists?
I mean,
They're just human beings that live in the 21st century.
Newtonian, you know what I mean?
They eat and sleep just like the people in the 17th century. That's not to turn them into this. I don't see it at all that way. To me, these concepts are timeless. Forget about the words. Why are you stuck with the words? It's a concept. It's a concept of cause and effect. They want to use different words. Maybe I'm using cause and effect because it's a simple. But look, I see this all the time. You see, for example, when you fuse two things together, you need things that are very similar. Like when they graft, they have to take bone or skin from a different part of the body to graft something. So you need something very similar to keep it connected. But then you have things that are more like ligaments that attach things, but they are just keeping them together, not fusing them. And you need really both things. You need two types of connectors here. That's how I'm looking at it. But let's see here. So personality, they're different. The common denominator among them, that would equalize the shtavas, the common factor, the similarity between them is only that both of them are mitzias ruchni. They're both ethereal. Here he means ruchni, not in the ruchni as in spiritual, godly. They're both sublime. And that's why the effect is commensurate to, or like, aligned with according to its emergence. Its personality is aligned to according to how the ilah is. The ima yesi muhus acher be'etzem, even though it's fundamentally a separate personality. Nevertheless, it assumes shape and reveals, and is revealed according to the way the ilah works. Let's take the child again. A child is according to its parents. It's going to have similar features, has genetic, hereditary elements. So it's according to the ilah, but it's a separate entity. Because being that it's an ethereal of the ethereal nature, why is he emphasizing Metzias Ruchni? That's what I want to know. I understand, because if it was a Metzias Gashmi, thinking for a second,
That's limited.
then it wouldn't happen?
Not such strong.
Because it's still doesn't have tangibility, that's why. It's not tangible? Is that the reason he's saying this? I'm wondering why he says Ruchni. And Gashmi also, the child is Gashmi, why does it have to be Ruchni? He's saying because it's shapeless? Being that it's a Metzias and its revelation is through the cause, that's why its shape, its form, and its revelation is like, according to is the same according to the, how do you say kfi
Type.
It's similar.
Yeah, the same type as the ilah. Separate personality, but same type, yeah. Let's read on. Maybe from comparative, by contrast, we'll understand it better. But fundamentally, it's a separate muhus from the ilah. He's trying to bavod in something that's gashmi. That's what it sounds like to me. In other words, I'll give you an example. I'm not saying that I'm correct here. I may be wrong completely, but I have to just try to explain it. Imagine here, I take my finger, I turn on a switch, light goes on. So ilav alul. If I had not done that, no light would go on. But it's gashmis. This light has nothing to do with my finger. It's not in any way similar to my finger. My finger was simply the catalyst. So there, because it's a gashmistic thing, so what? So it's because you're the cause doesn't mean the effect has to be similar and aligned with same type as the effect. The effect doesn't have to be aligned with the cause. But in a ruchnistic state where it doesn't yet have a tangible element to it, I'm just wondering, this is what he means. So let's say with a child. A child is not yet a tangible child, it's a seed. It's just an egg of one cell that's been fertilized, and now since it's still in that type of ethereal state, whatever's happening is going to be shaped by what is causing it. Because it's not a state that's separate. It's not two physical states. One is affecting the other, cause and effect. That's one way I would explain why he's focusing on the word ruchni. Again, I may be totally wrong, and maybe a different way to explain it. But you see what I'm trying to get to? Why does he say ruchni? In other words, if it's a ruchni, that's why. And if it wasn't, then it wouldn't be kfi efen ha'ilah. Not sure, positive. I'm not positive. Okay, is it only I'm the one being bothered by this? Okay, fine. I don't know if I'm right. Something's wrong with what I just said. I think ruchni.
There's no other way for it to be Nibdal Asnam at the same time.
You see, my example with the switch is not really a cause and effect. The light is not an effect of me. The turning on the light is an effect. I didn't create the bulb. Cause and effect, a different personality.
Exactly?
I guess physical would be the problem.
It doesn't mean exactly cause and effect. There's some other.
I just gave examples for it. It's any type of element or reality that is an outgrowth of a previous reality, and they have some relationship between the two. That's how I would call it. It's a causal relationship, what it's called. There are words for it in English.
I'm more difficulty with this
A
line.
causal relationship. Causal meaning there's cause and effect. Cause and effect works very well. Why not?
It can't be called a functional relationship.
You can call
It's a
that.
whole different thing.
You can call it that. Give me an example for it. Let's not use words here. Words are meaningless. Give me an example of what you mean.
I'm objectively, if you see two phenomena always coming together, it's a bigger jump to say cause and effect than to say there's a functional relationship between them.
That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about cause and
What the
effect.
words actually mean.
Ilo means cause and effect. I told you that the example he gave before was a branch of a tree. Everyone knows the branches of a tree are a direct outgrowth of the tree.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if the tree didn't yield branches, instead it yielded elephants? That would be a mahus acher. It's still growing on the tree, but it's a different mahus. That would be an example. The wood of the branches is similar to the wood of the tree. An apple tree is not growing branches of an orange grove.
What about the apples are coming out of the tree?
That's
It's also
functional.
Maybe. In fact, it says onof, a branch, correct. That needed a special bracha. The Eibishter had to make them was an additional blessing. It's not automatic.
Maybe that's the Ilova.
Fine, no problem. Listen, that's a good.
There's a multiplicity of
But
causes.
no, that's gashmi is when once it grows. But it could be the reason is that way because in the root before the apple becomes an apple, it was a ruchni. Maybe that I'm not sure. I'm not sure with the ruchni. I'm not positive. That's possible. Gashmi would be like literally, like I said, water is flowing, and that's a cause, and it's bringing a river. Now a river. Instead of a river, it suddenly becomes fire.
Yeah.
That would be that's not Ilva. That would be Gashmi. It doesn't happen. But being that, when I think I don't mean Ruchni as in spiritual. Ruchni as an ethereal. It's still not tangible. In other words, a tangible cause cannot cause a tangible effect to be completely different than itself. An ethereal cause can cause an ethereal effect to be a different personality. I think it means. I'm not positive. We can move on. Doesn't change the.
This line bothers me.
Yeah, that's clear. That's the whole point.
I know it's the whole point, but why do you have to say? I mean, why do you have to say that the olul is be'etzem and mahus acher from there?
Because that's this type of ilavol. Then now there's another one that's not like that. There's two types. He's not going to speak the other type.
I understand, but it could be. I don't think we brought an example.
I told you, a child. A child.
He's not mahus acher.
Yes, he is. A child is born.
He's a human being.
No, that's they're similar, but it's a separate individual.
That's what he means when he says mahus acher.
That's an example I gave.
No,
You want to give a different example? Give it.
It means even though they're both human beings, it's considered the mahus acher.
Yeah, for sure. It's not like the branch of a tree. It could be a fruit. A fruit compared to a branch is the same idea.
As another entity, not
a separate personality. When you eat an apple, it doesn't taste like the branch. A branch tastes like the tree, looks like the tree. An apple can be a completely different color, different muhus acher.
But it's a olul.
And then eventually the branches.
What you'll understand it better when we understand the second type of iluvol. Va'beis hu sha'ol hu pashta se'ila. And the second is not that it's just encompassed and as a catalyst revealed from the cause, it's actually an extension of the cause. And it's completely not, and it's not a separate personality. Like a branch that extends from a tree. It's from the person. It's from the same personality as the tree. It's not the actual tree. It is a branch. Kim onof, it's only onof hamispashad, it's only an extended branch mimenu from it. But you can't call it a separate entity.
Wouldn't the child fit in this one?
No, not at all. A child, how could you compare? A child's like a fruit. A child can have different color eyes, can different look, different personality, and so on. A branch cannot.
Which would you call it if you cloned a sheep and it was exact?
I don't know. You have to ask the Heicha Timtza people for that. You know, there's a riddle. What is that?
No.
If you have the answer to that, you'll understand Pshadi. Can you explain to me cloning? I don't even know what cloning is.
Because it has the same genetic, except for the mitochondria.
Tell me, what's the difference between regular children and cloning?
Because the cloning only is exactly the same as the mother. You make a female exactly the same. It's like it's like parthenon.
Okay, so cloning would be maybe level 2, and a regular child is not, because a regular child is definitely caused by the parents and has similarities to the parents, but it also can have elements and genes and all kinds of things that are not even rooted in the parents.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you did.
I'm just saying you're so sure that the child fits into the first one, right?
It's an example. You want to give me a different example?
No.
He's definitely, one second, forget about examples now. He's clearly saying there's two types of ilva.
Yeah.
And one is giving an example of a branch. Based on that example, I'm assuming that fruit is maybe an example for the first one.
Right.
It's fine. You have another example? Fine. I
more than this child, because the child I'm thinking
the child is even for me better, for example, than the fruit.
The second one, that's why I'm starting.
Maybe. I told you it's an example I gave. I'm not by all means standing that this is the example.
Like Baruch Kadadavu is an extension of his father. He's another. Physically, he's another person, but he's the same thing basically.
Maybe some children are that way, and some are not.
No, I understand what you're saying. You're saying personality is different, but it's still in.
I don't know what you're saying. He just said cloning. No child is exactly like their parent.
Right.
Every branch is exactly like the tree.
Even a clone is subtly a little different. There's one little subtle difference. That's.
Look, you can use any example. He doesn't give an example for the first one, and I don't believe back there.
Even the branch is subtly
I
different.
think it
too,
mentioned
though.
milking and meats.
Melchimedis was what? But example for which one?
Musafir.
Correct. Melchimedis is an example for a separate mohus. That's why I used the example of a child, because midas are like the child of Meichen. They're born out of Meichen, but they're a separate entity.
That's a pretty good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That perspective is.
Yeah. Anyway, as I said, since he doesn't bring this example, you can use any example that works.
You know, Gashmis. It's clear.
That's the example. The same thing in Ilva, that there's a cause and effect, that the ol is not separate from the cause. I think when you say Mahus Nivdal, you have to remember it means many things. Mahus Nivdal means that it's different than, like he says, a different type. It also means it's separate from.
Separate.
Detached, like.
What if you had a lollipop tree and it's attached? So that would be the first one Nibdal, or would it be the second?
I don't know. As I said, it sounds like some type of a game show.
No, but I want to know the essential thing. You said maybe it's because it's attached. I'm just saying. I gave you a ridiculous example, but if it was a case like that, would you say it was the Nibdal one or the common one?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand the meaning and use the examples to help understand. That's what we need here, is to really understand what he wants to say. He wants to say there's two types of effects. Look, I can give many examples. You can have two types of students, where a good teacher produced two students, and one student became completely different than the teacher was. Teaches a different way, even disagrees with his teacher, but the teacher was the one that got him going, empowered him, taught him how to think. But now his own personality came in, and once he got that, he went completely different than another student who's exactly a replica of his teacher. He thinks like him. And that's the brilliance. The teacher was able to train a student to be like himself. And not one is necessarily more than the other. One may be more creative or original, but I mean, that may be also an example.
Example for what? For which one?
You tell me which is which. The student that's completely different is Nivdal.
The branch. The one that's like the branch.
One's like the branch, and one is like a Nivdal. It's like, like, in other words, if you ask him, he'll give credit. He'll say, that's the teacher that taught me. He taught me the basics, the methods, and so on. But now he does it completely differently.
That's good.
It could be in music. It could be this. That may be a more appropriate example. Because generally, all the best examples are not physical ones. Because physical ones always have distortions. Water and gas, is it the same? Not the same. In Hashpah, because teacher and student is always the go-to marshal to this, because it's the closest to. No, because it's God created Mashpia Makabel. All the examples with Tzimtzum.
If you learn some both.
No, all the examples of Tzimtzum. The Alter Rebbe is the student, the teacher withdrawing his energy. In other words, because remember, it's all about. So this is all about relationships. Relationships. Where do we have relationships? You have student and teacher. You have husband and wife. You have parent and child. You have friends. But that's already the economic. That added a whole new clipper.
Right.
And
What was that one?
God.
Employer.
boss
Yeah,
and
you
worker.
have that master and slave, and
Yeah. No, but the relationship, but a student-teacher is a very good example for many things, because student-teacher has all the elements, like he says in Tanya, when he speaks all the 10 spheres, there's the student's love for the teacher's love for the student, so he wants to transmit. Then he needs gvura to withhold. Then he needs teferes, then this, then he needs kloyes says how to teach. So it's always an excellent example. Maybe this example does actually, I like this example. Not perfect either, because the student is not a product of the teacher. Teacher taught him how to think. He did have his personality. It's example on the teaching, right. not so much on the. Not obviously the student doesn't have to look like the teacher.
Multiplicity of causes and one. You know what
Look,
I mean? It's like you can never get to the stage where you say one cause and one olo. That's the problem with the olo, the way we're translating.
Okay. Look, there's all examples to understand Atzilus and Biyah, and I think it's all examples really to understand two types of relationships between a cause and an effect. Like in this case, teacher-student. There's two types, and each has its virtue, each has its quality. Okay, this one. So we have two types. There's you have a case where the effect is not separate, detached from the cause. And then there is muhus nivdal. It's a separate personality, detached, nivdal, separate. Havdalah, separate. And yet it's still ilava'ol for the reasons you said before, because it starts from there. It's the catalyst. From there it originated. It was encompassed. It was revealed. Yeah, because even that student, that thing that explains differently. Let's say Shammai and Hillel from Shmai Vavtayin. That's also Shmai Vavtayin's ideas were amorphous. They could have gone either way. Shammai turned it into Gvura, Hillel into Chesed. They could trace it back to their source of the arguments. They could even go back and change their opinions. That's also so when it goes into Gvura, it's a Shini Mahus for sure. Not that but it's not a Chidush Yesh Ma'ayin. It's still Ilav Ol, because it came from the ideas of Shammai, but the personality of Hillel was drew it into Chesed. No, now you can have other students that remain like Shmai Vavtayin. When you hear them speak, you don't know whether it's Chesed or Gvura. You could also have that. So they're very similar.
It's not a Mohosach. It goes into Chesed, doesn't mean it's a Mohosach. It could be that that's what Shmai Vavtayin had originally in the idea.
But then the other one has a different Mohus, which is called Gvura. That's for sure.
Which one is the Mohosach?
Someone is for sure. Or maybe both, because Shmai Vavtayin, it was the Chatchila, an idea that carried two possibilities, and they knew that. They knew there would be two possibilities that can come out of this idea. You could have that too. In other words, there could be students that are just like Shmai Vavtayin. They don't pass on anything. They just keep going at the same flow of ideas, and you can't come to any conclusion.
They're branches.
I told you when my book Torah Meaningful Life came out, I got a call from Chaim Chigron in Australia. He said to me, "I got to ask you a question. We just had a big debate here by Sheva Brachos." He called me from Australia in the middle of the night.
Those days it wasn't 3 cents a minute.
He said to me, "What's the argument?" He said to me, "Yosel Gutnick is saying that you wrote the Rebbe is not Mashiach." And I said, impossible. I know somebody would never write that. He may not write the Rebbe's Mashiach, but he's not going to write the Rebbe's not. Like some type of statement. Right. So other people said they read it and it says that the Rebbe is Mashiach. So they said, well, what would you say? I said, you're both right.
You're both right.
Like they said, I feel like the Rebbe now. I feel, God forbid, but I feel aligned, because that's exactly two people looking at the same sikha. This one says he says yeah, this one says he says no. So I said that means I'm exactly, it's good that let them argue about this just like they argue about the sikha. So I achieved my goal.
He never said I need Rebbe.
Right. So I'm just saying that sometimes that's itself you want to convey. You want to say, I'm intentionally being ambiguous. Like the guy that says, when they come to poll him, he says, so you're voting right or left? He says, I think I'm from the undecided. It's also a category. It's a darga to remain undecided. Like the guy, the guy that says, I used to think I'm indecisive, now I'm not so sure. I had to throw that joke in. Okay, back to this. So there's two types of Ilav Ol.
Well, he gave the exact same example, so honestly.
He didn't say, but here he also gave before the same, the Esses Firis in the Levana, and didn't refer to it for some reason. Look back in chapter 39. Very nice. Now we're going to understand this. Al derech mashal meseichel midas. We can understand this, for example, from an example of meseichel, from an example of meseichel midas, from intelligence and emotions. And thought, speech, and action. So we have the faculties Chabad and Chagas Nahim and Machshava Dibra Maisa. Shekulam b'chinas ilav olo. They are all in a form of cause and effect. They're not separate worlds. They're all part of a progression of activity. They're a progression. That's really a good example. Cause and effect is a progression. Cause and effect is like domino effect. You can visibly trace the cause. You press a domino, this. When there's no cause and effect, Sibum Mesubov is more detached. And then there's Yashmayan, of course, where you can't trace. You could see something and you have no way to trace where it came from. I don't mean because it's hidden, because it's not direct, immediate cause and effect. It would be like if the Eibishter said, I want now Kriyas Yamsuf to happen. What's the cause, what's the effect? So it's true, it said the wind should... But still, but then what caused the wind? There's always a step which is like a jump. A leap. But in science, but in the scientific world, in the natural world, Ilav Ol is a driving force. There's cause and effect. This is causal science is critical. All Newtonian science is based on it. And Newtonian science, by the way, with all quantum mechanics, with all respect, does not govern the macroscopic world. It's governed by Newtonian physics till this day. Simple as that. If you rely on things, you know certain things you strike it a certain way will always have the same effect. Always the same cause and effect. The billiard ball effect, they say. You strike a billiard ball a million times, the same way, same angle, same power, will always have the same result. Which is the basis of our being able to rely. There was a book a few years ago that the most reliable machine on earth, the computer, is based on uncertainty principle. So the most certain thing in life that we completely depend. You depend on your computer. Your computer is not not going to be neurotic, and one day it has in a bad mood and gives you different results.
Mine is, but
okay, that's because I was once by a shliach. Thursday night he had a fabrengen with his chavrusas, with the chaverim online. So we go in there. He has a bottle of mashki, he has a computer, and then the fabrengen. So I said, why don't you pour in a little into the computer to make things lebedik? He says the lebedik, it'll sever the connections. Okay, but so that would be an idea for shluchim, like a little spout in the back of a computer. You pour in, and then
that's Microsoft.
And create the circuitry gets a little
virtual.
That would be cool. If you could create some virtual, like a computer also is a little psabissal intoxicated.
That's Windows Sky.
So one guy told me his computer reached the level of Adla Yada.
Windows 8 is very mild now.
Yeah. Yeah. You never have when your keyboard goes crazy? Like, you press a button and something else happens? You don't know whether you're drunk or the computer is drunk. So here we have a progression of switches, Ilav switches. As it's known, emotions from seichel are Ilav. Now remember, very important qualification, a thing I learned in Ayim Beis that always bothered me. Midas, constantly says, you contemplate and Midas are born. Can you tell me the last time that happened to somebody? Mar Midas are raw emotions. You don't contemplate, you're hungry, you're hungry. And you see something that affects your heart. So it's ashtikal aved. But earlier we learned, if you remember, he said that midas, that we talk midas tivim, he says it's not real midas, that's rotzen. The desires we have and the temptations we have are not what we call midas. And I wish they told us to us in yeshiva. That when we say midas, you don't mean, yes, there is an element of midas which is our feelings. But that's not midas. The midas that Chassidus talks about. When I'm saying, obviously we're not talking about midas tivim. Chassidus says natural midas, then a person has that. But when it talks, usually seichel and midas, it's talking about midas that are deliberately created through a contemplation. You think about God, and you have a love for God. That's a perfect example. It's not just whatever happens to wake up in your morning, when you wake up, whatever feeling you wake up in the morning.
It needs to be premeditated.
Wow.
It's important. It's distinction. Now that doesn't mean we don't have Ava Mishateh. You could have a hidden love for something. You still need a catalyst, but there's a catalyst because we don't think about it. By us, we're essentially social animals. We're emotional human beings. We run by impulse, by instincts, by impulsively. Our mind once in a while weighs in with a little reflection, and says this, says that. But a true person who's in control of his life, Moich Shal Ta'alev, it's the other way around. He doesn't just have midas. I just heard from someone that the Rebbe Rashab told the Chassid, his name is Raskin, he told him to say Tikkun Chatzos every night, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. And one night he fell asleep. Of all the many, once. So he went to Rebbe Rashab, by them falling asleep, Tikkun Chatzos.
He went to Tikkun for his missed Tikkun.
Right. So Rebbe Rashab said to him, the Rebbe Rashab Pshittis, he says, Wie kommt es, als is nicht kein Balabos of sein eigener Körper? Like, he was shocked. How is it possible that a Jew is not in control of his own body?
Wow.
I said to myself, none of us are in control of our body. And here, one time he missed, Wie kommt es? How is it possible a Jew is not in control of his body? Like, it wasn't even it's crazy. And he's talking to a regular chassid, not a Rebbe.
Wow.
Wie kommt es? Huh? Interesting, huh?
Train himself to
He had an operation or something.
So bottom line is that when you look Siddish, you realize it's a different standard of what's expected. We're not impulsive creatures. We are meant to be in control of ourselves. So the midas are an outgrowth of the seichel. So he goes here. The leidas v'his galus hamidas ba min ha-seichel. The birth and the revelation of the midas come from the intelligence. The kashamevin b'seichel shadavar tev lefanov, when he understands with his mind that the thing is good for him. This we learn. That's the place where we learn this. That's good for him. Harihu me'ered ba'ava. When you contemplate. So the emotions, when you see something that's attractive to you, or food, or whatever, or something chutenius, then obviously you don't need your mind. Your raw animal emotions are drawn to things. It's our discipline.
That's Rotzen.
He calls that Rotzen. What's midas tivim? Yeah, it's basically, when I say Rotzen, not so much the level of kesser. He means that it's fundamentally it's innate feelings. It's not what he calls midas. Midas is when you sit down, you contemplate on something, and then you realize it's important for you, it's good for you, like he says. Then it awakens, Meseder, it arouses Ava, when he understands it's not good for Lefanov, for him, before him. Hadova, this thing, does not desire it.
Wow.
It means he's not drawn to it, he's repelled by it. So it's Ava and Yireh, or Chesed and Gvura, based on attraction and repulsion. So we see from this, number one is that the midas are outgrowth of the seichel, and they would not be there at the seichel not contemplated on the value of that thing. Then there's this galus. Then there's the revelation of the feelings that this galus midas being that they were a result of the contemplation. So it's a cause. He's going to say it's a completely different mahus, because a feeling is not a thought. But the second thing he says is that, first of all, they're born from there, and secondly, they are emerged, they're revealed. What do we say? Like in the same type. There's not commensurate, according to the method of the seichel, the style. And he's presenting this in a parenthesis. What does that mean? In the subtlety or the lack of subtlety, the crassness of the emotion. And that's the intensity or the weakness. That's lefi eifan haseichel. Yeah, I understand. It's a very subtle point he's making here. He's if your seichel is a very subtle one, let's say you're contemplating on godliness.
Subtle and refined, no? Like a...
Yeah. Subtle, refined, yeah. Let's say you're contemplating on a subtle thing. So the feeling for it is not going to be a crass feeling, because it's going to be the same style as the thought. let's say, I'll take an example. A person is contemplating on the beauty of music, on a violin. So the feeling for it is commensurate with what the subtlety of what you're thinking about. If you're contemplating, let's say, on something that's more crass, I'm not talking about a taiva now. We're talking about you contemplating on something that's not as, a little more, let's say I'm thinking something, nothing usher, I'm not talking about something forbidden. Something very, very...
Halacha of killing a molek, something like that.
No, it could be that, or something like that. Something that is, let's say, the kavanah of the necessary when you shecht an animal. So the midah is also not a subtle one. It's about, it's not a good example. No, it needs something that you're attracted to. It would be something you're attracted to that is based on a seichel that is not as choras. It's more, he says, teikef and chlishus also, intensity and weakness. Dakus and chumris, and he says that's the inyan of teikef and chlishus. Which one's teikef? Dakus? And what's chumris? No, I understand the first half. Dakus and chumris I can find examples for. Let's say you're contemplating on making money, panos, and you conceive of ideas, and the more you like it, the more you're attracted to this idea. The attraction is going to be far more coarse, crass, than if it's a subtle thing in ruchnis. That's one example I would give. But v'hu'inyan teikef v'chlishus is not so clear to me. What's teikef? When it's more subtle and more refined, it's more intense, or the other way around? Like you said, oi teikef v'chlishus, I'd understand. He's saying this is teikef v'chlishus. This needs explanation. This parenthesis. Yeah, it's not enough data initially. I usually these things get clearer when you learn on, because he's same Rebbe writing. So let's move on.
I'm blown away with that midas.
Okay. So the lefiefen haseichel hamechayovim es hamidus, according to the way the seichel that is compels these emotions, that causes them mechayov. So how would you say mechayovim? That what?
Obligate?
Not obligate. No. That compel, that impel, that an inevitable result, basically. Mechayev. It's
Compels it. That compels it.
Yeah, compels these midas. So according to the seichel, that's how the midas will be. Yeah. You could have this. You could have two people contemplating on God. Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his long letter to the Rebbe, and Chaim Mushki writes that the people, when they say Dalif Nemi Ata Emed, they're mizbainin, it says know before you who you're standing there, think of a big ox. So you start trembling. They close their eyes and they think of a big, huge ox that's about to gore them. So they start trembling. When you're chassid, what do you think about? You think about a very, very sublime God, and you stand in awe out of the sublime. So in other words, the midah, both of them we econom midah. One is, that's I think a good example. That example I think fits. How teikef and chlishus, I'm not sure. But maybe I think chlishus.
It's not like something we work.
Okay, listen.
Listen,
you have to control your excitement because I'm trying to learn here. You're like.
Kidding me, can't you start?
And the same thing, thought, speech, and action are in a state of cause and effect. Thought, speech, and action are garments for nefesh, roch, neshama in nefesh, in the soul. Okay. What's nefesh, roch, neshama? The seichel is neshama. Midas is ruach. And koyach haydah is nefesh, like basically basic acknowledgement in the shamash. Zeh b'chinas nefesh. Oh no! My mistake. 1 second. 1 minute here. One minute. No, maybe didn't. Shein seichel midas koyach haydah sheb neshama zeh b'chinas nefesh. What's b'chinas nefesh? Oh, the haydah. You're right. Okay. So naran sheb nefesh. Shein seichel midas that's nefesh, neshama, and ruach. Okay, he only spells out the third one. Fine. She says that's machshava dibra ma'isa. 1 second. Seichel midis machshava dibra ma'isa. Let me see what he says here. Shemehen mishtalshlim halavushim machshava dibur ma'aser b'derech hilval. From these three levels, evolve shtalshlim, the garments of thought, speech, and action in a form of cause and effect. Okay, he's going to explain how. In other words, so he decides seichel and midas is cause and effect. Now he's going to explain how machshava dibur ma'aser, thought, speech, and action, come from nefesh, ruach, and neshama in a form of cause and effect. Let's see here. The Indian in this is the Indian machshava dibur ma'aser mavur kan ein hakavan esis hamachshava ve'esis hadibur ve'esis hama'aser shen esis aksav. The intention here, explanation here, machshava is not intention. The letters in thought and the letters in speech and the letters in action, which are letters in writing, which are like written letters, like we learned in the previous mimer. The written letter, the spoken letter, or the thought letter.
Written is the most like Gashmi.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here. Talking about the power of thought and the power of speech, not how they manifest. You do it. The masha esis boimin amitzois acheh min hagorin, because it's known that when asis come from the mitzois, from the gutturals, the hey mitzois apeh, we said the lips, the tongue, the throat, the teeth, and the palate. So acheh min hagorin, when the letters aleph, ches, hey, ayin come from the throat, they're throat oriented. Gecha, gimel, yud, chav, kuf, min hachayach, they come from the palate. Gi, you have to put your tongue up in the palate. And then there's the others. There's the letters bum, bayis, vav, mem, fei, I think, are connected with the lips. And then there's the other letters. Anyway, basically, there's 22 letters. And you don't count the long time. It's 22 letters, so they're 4 times 5. It's 20. The other 2, I think, are safest. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's how it works.
I think something like that. I have to check. Yeah. No
overlap.
No. Look, depends how well you pronounce, but it's the dominant ones. I think there's no overlap. So he's saying, so these aces that come from the mitzois, from these different parts of the mouth, doesn't mean the etzem, the actual creation of the letters, comes from this. Like it's like an instrument. In other words, to say, we don't say this. In other words, to say the letters were not there altogether. And actually, when you put your teeth together, it created a letter. And with these mitzois, with these gutturals, is what created the letters. Now here they are, and here's how they became. It's not correct. That's not accurate. Because if that's the case, an animal also has all those features in the mouth. And they can't speak. And also a mute person, his mouth can be completely functional. I think that's really a type of an ilam. Someone is completely functional and cannot speak, not someone who has a defect. Then they call him something else, right? Someone who has a defect in their mouth, I don't think they call him a mute person. Because it can happen later in life. Not like it can happen later, like Moshe, right? Exactly, it could happen later in life, and that's not the gedder of an ilam. The person who never. Usually, an ilam is someone mute is usually a sign also of someone that will probably be deaf. Or is it that the case? No, if he's deaf, he can't speak.
That's I think Rashi qualifies.
Different ways. And so bottom line is, you can't say the letters are created. The letters are in the core of the nefesh, as we learned earlier. Where did we learn? That's a few chapters ago. And that's the power of the nefesh to express and reveal itself. And there's 22 different type of powers that reveal the nefesh, which is the 22 letters. Because all the transmissions and revelations of the nefesh is through its power to reveal itself, to express itself. That's the right word. And there's 22 ways. Like the amshacha from the power of seichel, from the spirit, the power of emotions, everything comes through the letters in the nefesh. So in other words, the asis are rooted beforehand. They come out through the expression comes technically out through your instrument, but they're rooted in the nefesh. Seichel and midas all come through these keiches hayis galus. So in other words, letters are essentially another way of saying channels. Also, channels of expression. So the nefesh has a lot of power, a lot of energy in it. The fact that God put the letters in the nefesh, so created channels that the nefesh could have ways to express itself. So that's what letters are rooted. But there, of course, they don't have the shape of actual letters. They're just expressive. They like to think of them as channels. Channels. No, they're not instruments yet. They're just channels. And when there is a transmission, there's a manifestation, a drawing out on the revelation, a expression from the Spirit, now the letter, that which is the power of expression from that particular hamshacha that's coming out now, nimtza kol ba'er, is encompassed in the eir v'hamshacha, in Shema Nefesh. So in other words, we learned this earlier. Where did we learn this? Just a few chapters ago. How this works. Remember, he also spoke about the aces being there. No, not that. Not that. Where was it about the letters? Spoke about this at length with the aces. Well, the last chapter he said it about Atzilus. He spoke about aces, that the aces are muhusa kel mamish. But the aces are mushish in the nefesh. He said it. We had a whole discussion on this. Okay, I'll look for it later. Yeah. With the child, with the Kei Chadiba, how you learn to speak. The Seichel and Dibur.
That's when he...
the Seichel and Dibur. That the Isis are there in the child, he says. And yet he can't speak. He needs a Meichen the Katnus to be the catalyst, right? That's what I was referring to. Yeah. Kuf Memvov, yeah. That just came to the end. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, bottom line is that, so essentially think of it like this. The nefesh is an entity full of power. But it could be locked and trapped if there were no asis. God put asis in there. It's like the asis had a shimu. Sounds very similar. He put asis like the 10 hidden spheres, right? He put asis. Those asis are osa boiker. Remember osa. They draw. They're like channels. So now when the neshama has a reason or wants to reveal itself, express itself, it has asis to work with. And as the Amshacha transmits, that's what it said, Nimtza kol ba'er v'amshacha shebanefesh. The letters are in there and channeling it. We're talking about the stages before it's expressed mamish outward. The tchilas amshach v'izgalus ha'adei esis shukeach ha'izgalus. The beginning of the transmission and the expression is through the letters, which is, as he said, esis are keach ha'izgalus. Key words. They're the power to express. You could have everything inside of you, but not have a power to express. That's lacking esis. So there's 22 mini keiches zgalos nefesh. Va'achar kach nimtzu keich hagilui she'ena esis klum b'hamshacha ve'izgalus. So first, in the beginning of the transmission, you have the letters. That's the beginning of the power to express. 1 second. Not simple matter here. Fine. Then comes stage 2. Nimtzu keich hagilu she'ena esis klum b'hamshacha ve'izgalus. How is this different than the first letter? Nimtza kol b'er v'hamshacha the esis shukeich ha'izgalus. Ach nimtza keich hagilu she'ena esis klum b'hamshacha ve'izgalus. It's like a second stage. And afterwards is the keich hagilui, the power to reveal, which are the letters that are encompassed in the transmission and expression. It almost sounds like there's letters in the beginning of the transmission, there's letters now in the middle of the transmission.
Well, there's the actual letters that are column in the nefesh. Then there's the nefesh, and then there is the way it's right before the galus. It's called.
Yeah.
It's 3 stages.
It's like Rory Kaylee.
Yeah, it's probably the letters that are kol, and that's what allows it to express. And then Nimtsu Keach Hagili, then when it actually starts expressing, there are letters that are encompassed. Then comes stage 3, when they actually come into the mouthpiece.
You can tell this is the
then the letters assume tangible existence, tangible properties. And through that is the Gili Mamash. So the Nefesh has in it Eisis. Let's read it again.
Yeah, I think that's where he's going with this.
Now the Ikar Eisis saying Be'etzem HaNefesh. What's the sound? ויש כאן בייס בין המשך בכך לשמן בכך מידי שמן הכל ידי שמן נפש בוא המשך הוא יסגלס בין הנפש אבל זה המשך יסגלס comes from the נפש הנה איסיס שזה זה כל okay, fine. But the primary role, the primary element of the letters is not the expressed sounds that you make. It's the power of expression that's nimtze be'etzem hanefesh, that is contained and found in the core of the soul. And the same in the revelations from the soul. There he goes back again, because also an animal has a speech that comes from Mitzoyis Levad without that intelligence from within the soul. Could also be by an animal, like a K'moyef Hazazir or a papagay. I don't know what a Hazazir is.
What's a papagay?
A papagay is a parrot. A parrot. Hazazir, I'm not sure.
Maybe it's a little parrot. So what are they?
A parakeet, maybe. Like the bird, that's the papagay. Shemalamdim Eisei L'daber, that they train it to speak. So technically, you can get an animal to express if they have the gutturals. And still, it's not in the level of medaber at all. You call it medaber. Because they don't have a power of expression. They have power of a technical sound to make. The only thing is, you can train them to move the mouth a certain way. The mitzvah is the 5 different elements, and through that, letters will emerge. That's why they can't speak anything except what you train them to speak. Meaning, but they hear from others.
Because they're not being megala oisius, they're just using their...
He's trying to say is that the main element of oisius is in the nefesh. And a real medaber, that's the real medaber. And the fact that you can technically make sound is the result of that is expressed letters. He's trying to say ilav ha'olul here, machshava d'bramaisa, where it comes from. So he's not talking about the letters on paper, or he's not talking about the technical expression of thinking with letters, or speaking letters, or writing letters. He's talking about the root of it is in the ability to express yourself, either to yourself, to others, or in writing. Now, 1 second. But that's what he's saying. An animal has the element of letters is just expression. An animal also has that. There are animals that can be trained, and that's why you can't teach them. They can't speak anything except which they're trained or they hear. And this you can't call speech. Speech is expression, which tells us a very important lesson. There are a lot of human beings that are also papagyas. That all they do is echo. What do they call it? They parrot other people's words, and so they don't. There's no right. What do you think about that? That's the tragedy. That a parrot's a parrot is nishkin pella.
Yeah. That's what I teach the students today. Just repeat what he said.
Because dibur is expression. Someone says to me, "You have the gift of gab." They call it. The people who have the gift of gab. They can talk a lot, but they say nothing. Or they say, "Who says it?" People talk more and more about less and less. You know. Then someone says, "Are you expressing yourself? Do you know how to express yourself?" That's a whole other story. I know how to sell you something. Like someone told me, he says, "I don't know if I can take you where you want to go, but I sure can take you for a ride." You know? Can you express yourself? It's another story. So this is dibur. It's the other way around. It's not that you have a power to say words and express words. That gives you power of expression. Because you have a power of expression, that compels and drives the speech. Through that comes the speech through your mouth. So you don't just speak. You speak because you're expressing. You want to express something. It's coming from somewhere. Like I said before about the midas. Most of our midas are just impulsive. Most of our talking is also impulsive. People talk just to talk. Whatever. Then there's talking deliberate, planned, premeditated. You think it through, thoughtful, reflective. Zarzin. Okay, that's a good word. We got to find out what a zarzin is. Okay, very good. This goes right there. But Diberman says, so we find from this to understand all this comes to explain how our speech, thought, and thought, speech, and action are a form of cause and effect. They're levushim. It's true. That's why he's making such a fuss here. Usually, machshava dibur ma'aseh, we speak the other way around. We say seichel amidus is the content, and machshava dibur ma'aseh is the expression. Machshava is to yourself when you're focusing on an idea. Dibur is when you speak, and ma'aseh is when you build something, or you write it, or you create something from it. Here he's saying, he's talking now, machshava dibur are formed. Where does it come from? They're not like, think of garments in the closet. They're worthless in the closet. When you put them on, they shape around your body and they express. So it's not like many people. We live in a world where everything is packaging. First, you look at you say, okay, what mood do I want to convey? So I put on a certain garment. It's really the other way around. Your garment should be expressing who you are, not who you are should be following your garments. In other words, are you your mask or are you you? That's the question. So here clearly, Machshav Dibur Ma'aseh says, it's rooted. So where does it come from? From the Eir and Gili, from the Nefesh, the light, the reflection, and the expression of the soul. And from there it comes automatically. For I am Mashin is Bar Lekamon, Ubayin Mashin is Bar Le'il, Pedakuf Mem Zayin. That's that chapter, yeah.
That's the next chapter, right?
Yeah. And thought and the letters of thought. So now we've established that Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, we're not talking here about Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh as they are the expression of it, because expression is just the last step. We're talking about how it begins in the early steps, early stages in the spirit where the letters begin. Then he says now Machshava, the letters of Machshava Shayachim are more fitting, more connected, more related to intelligence. Eisis Adibur Shayachim Yisrael Amidus. Letters of speech are more related to emotions. That's why the letters of thought are more subtle, because they're more connected to intelligence. It's an interesting take. Dibur is connected more to Midas. Okay, that's because of Naran. But I'm not sure what it means on Havana. Let me read it, then we'll figure it out.
Basically, when you express yourself,
loudly, but a teacher,
loudly, lower, see what.
Yeah, but a teacher also expresses himself through Dibur. But Batabam, you teach Torah through speaking. It's not just emotions. Okay, clearly Machshava clearly lends itself more to ideas as opposed to thinking about your feelings.
Machshava doesn't express anything.
Dibur is usually related to Dibur. Nafshe yotze bedabre. It says that when you are really passionate, the Dibur becomes a critical component. In other words, an emotion that just remains in your thought is not really that intense. That's probably what he's saying, something like that.
Somebody talks
okay.
Kind of where he is emotional.
Yeah. And that's why the letters of thought are far more subtle. So even though Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh are coming from Seichel Amidus, and they're coming from the power of expression within the spirit, but the actual thought, speech, and action are Muhus Achar. from the faculties. You can't compare them. You can't say the words of speech, the expression of speech, or expression of thought is the same personality as your faculty itself. It's ultimately a tool, an instrument. Sheba nefesh. Shezeu hamshachim hanefesh. Because the keiches sheba nefesh is the hamshachim. That's the transmission from the soul. Ubchinas nivdul mehem. No, I'm sorry, I read it wrong. Because they're a separate personality from the faculty of the soul, because that's the hamshachim hanefesh. Machshava d'maisa is already the expression, the drawing out of the nefesh. They're not the nefesh itself. Ubchinas nivdul mehem, and a state of separation, separate from them. Because the nefesh, all you have is the power to express. What? 1 second. Oh, because the nefesh, we're not talking here about the etzem nefesh. We're talking about machshava d'maisa. It's only the keiach hizgal sheba nefesh. It's only the power to express in the soul. Shu keiach nivdol. That's a separate power. In other words, huh?
Top of the page.
So
Yeah.
Parrot have a nefesh or not?
Why not?
So it would be in the level of nefesh.
I don't know what you're asking exactly. I'm not sure. What do you mean by nefesh? A parrot is alive, so it has a spirit. What's your asking? What is that? How is this relevant here?
You just talk about a parrot.
A parrot is what? The parrot does not have medaber. It's not a medaber.
Right.
Has no intelligence and has no power of expression from its soul. No, it does not have. It has the mechanical sounds it makes.
So that's a level lower than nefesh, you're saying? Or nefesh?
No, I don't know where you get the level of nefesh. Nefesh is not a level. What are you saying? I'm saying nefesh is the spirit.
There's a spirit.
The spirit of a human being that has the power to express. But the power to express is not the soul itself. Shu koyach nivdol. In other words, a soul is a as I said, is a bundle of energy. This energy cannot express itself ever. It can remain in its state of unexpression. Expression is already a outside element.
That's what animals have. They have this bundle of energy without a level of expression.
Yeah, but it's a different type of bundle of energy that can never express, and that's not meant to express.
They don't have raw.
No, it's not. They don't have a nefesh like we have. It's a completely different type of spirit. Animals don't work here. Animals only an example to show the other way around. That where you have ilah va'ol going on. Animals, there's no ilah va'ol. There's no inner spirit wanting to express itself that's expressing through speech. By them, it's only a mechanical thing. It's almost reflexive. A human being has it coming from within, but expression is still not the soul itself. It's a different muhuz. That's what he's saying.
This bundle of energy that you said is only in a human being. The animal has
This type of bundle of energy that's going to express itself.
The
Yeah.
animal just has a life force to keep it alive.
Yeah, and it expresses itself also, not through words. It expresses itself in other ways, sounds. Yeah, but that's not relevant here. The same thing in the transmissions from the spirit. It's only the revelation of their revelation. It's not the actual faculty of intelligence or emotions or feelings. It's an expression of them. And even though the emotions are also a revelation and not the core, that's because they're only a reflection. How does that answer the question? It's the other way around. The faculties are also an additional element, but they're only a reflection of the source. Here we're talking about a separate thing, separate entity that's expressed. I have to think about this. Like we learned earlier in the Maimer of Osim Dvari B'Ficha. What Maimer was that? Yeah, Yisrael Sabo Tfuna. I have to look back there. But their core personality, their chesed and gvura, similar, and the letters, their fundamental personality is expression. I'm not sure what he says in this parenthesis. I think he's saying there they have an identity. Machshava Dibra Maisa have no identity. They express whatever they want. It's like garments. They have no personality. They express whatever is put in them. Maybe he's saying something like that. I'm not sure. Let's read on. So we've established that he's going back to what he began. First he said Machshava. He started with Midas and Meichen, and then he went to Machshava Dibra Maisa, and now he's going back. The same thing. Emotions are a separate entity, personality from intelligence. They're different faculties. They're not intelligence. And nevertheless, we said they're born out of intelligence, and they work according to them, governed by them. The whole idea of feelings are hagosha, are sensation, a feeling. Sensing yourself, feeling yourself is the foundation of emotions. You cannot have any emotion like love or respect or awe, attraction or repulsion without feeling yourself.
Because what's loving, in other words?
Yeah. Love means I like this, I don't. Take away the I, what do you have? Seichel has nothing to do with I. The idea is true, the idea isn't true. It's nothing to do with whether you like it or not. He said this also. We learned this back. This goes back all the way in the chapters 39, 40. He said these words. He said this idea. Remember, he said this. That's why das, which is Havgosha, is the chai, is the life, the energy, and the inner dimension of midas. Because das is hergish. Das is sensing the truth of something. Like it says elsewhere. And also midas are in a form of excitement, arousal. He's explaining how different they are from meichen. They are born from the intelligence, but they are, number one, hargosha satzmei. The meichen ain't a shayach kolzeh. And intelligence, all this is not possible. Doesn't have any. There's no shayach. It's not real. It's not. Doesn't exist. Sheinu b'chinas hargosha. Firstly, they're not in a form of hagosha, feeling. The opposite of feeling yourself. They're in a state of suspension and putting yourself aside. Like it says, any arrogant person is a sheita, is not a chacham, is a fool, an idiot. It's like it's mocking someone. He thinks he's a smart and is, a guy. I saw a man that thought he was smart in his own eyes. Smart aleck, right? In order to come to the truth of an intelligence, it's specifically if you don't feel yourself and your needs and your interests. That's number one, and also the second aspect of hispilus. Yeah. And also, intelligence is also not excited, not excitable. Excitement will confuse, will disturb. Turbulence will not distort. That's misalaf. It confuse you. It gets in the way. It's turbulence that gets in the way of the meichen. It goes back again, and also feeling yourself also mevalbel. So in addition to that, you can't come to the truth of it. It'll also actually disturb. Mevalbel will be a disturbance. Like it says elsewhere. So we see from this, on the other extreme, though they're born in Ilav, but they're different, they're a completely different personality. This is the key. And because it's nivdal, because it's separate, so though they come from there, but they only come from the reflection of intelligence, not from the core intelligence. Because it's not intelligence. It's driven by it. And being born from it, but it's not the core intelligence. The same thing with the Machshava Dibra Maisa, apparently, it's a muhus nivdal, so it comes from the reflection of the soul, the expression of the soul, but not the soul itself. That's what he says here. It needs a little, this is not an easy chapter, because it's very subtle, a lot of things are very... He said clearly, because until you contemplate that it's good for you, you're not going to want it. Why don't you just go back what he said?
As opposed to raw emotion, which is raw.
Okay, let me just do the kitzur and let's conclude here. Kitzur. And he preferences how there's two types of cause and effect. One is that the cause, the effect is a separate entity, personality from the cause. Like emotions that are born from the intelligence and according to the intelligence. He puts that all in the beginning of the chapter now. Because the truth is, he went first Meichen Midas, Machshava Dibur Maisa, and back to Meichen Midas. That was the order. The Muhusacha, like in two things. First of all, Hergish Atzmi, they sensing yourself. Ubispalas, and excitement and arousal. And intelligence is suspending yourself, putting yourself aside, and without excitement. It's the same thing, the power. Not actual thought, speech, and action. The power to express are an effect from the cause of intelligence and midas. The kreich machshava d'mitzvah kreich is galus shebenefesh. Because the power of thought, speech, and machshava dibur, he says, not even ma'aseh here. He's not using ma'aseh. He's only saying machshava dibur, by the way. 1 second. Is that what he used before? I thought he said all three. No, before it was machshava dibur and ma'aseh. Here he's only saying machshava dibur. They're a power of expression of the soul. Shayodeh hu amshachas shayodom hu amshachas v'giluim manepes. Through them is the transmission and the carrying and the expression of the soul. And also the actual transmissions have in them an expression. That's the second stage. So there's the soul itself can express itself, is the power of expression. Then also the actual, when it's starting to express, to trying to transmit, that's the keich machshava dibur ma'aseh. Therefore it's cause and effect. And yet, even though it's cause and effect that it's coming from there, because it's the expression of the soul, but the letters themselves are a separate entity. They're channels that are separate from the actual energy of the soul. And therefore the revelation of them is in a detached type of reflection, because it's caused by them, but it's a separate entity. So it remains a harder nivdelis. The next chapter is going to be how all this is in Avodas Hashem, which maybe will help us understand it all. So we did chapter 149, page 290 through 292.